So the key lesson here is, this is one of the dilemmas of copywriting that we all fall into, is that imagine if your boss came to you and said, I want to improve the copy of the page. It's, if you were working for Hush, it's a very complicated thing. You have to understand what the product does. You have to read all the reviews. It's not a simple 2-hour project. And I have a very simple hack for that. And this is something that I think more people need to focus on. If consumer behavior, it's what I find really beautiful about consumer behavior is that it is ridiculously predictable. And so we can actually learn from it. I don't care what your website is, and I don't care what your product is, and I don't care what year it is, right? 2020 versus 1750. What you will find is that if you have technology that can actually track people's attention spans, you will notice that the attention is the highest at the opening of the sales pitch, and then progressively gets worse and worse, right? So people that got to third page of your sales pitch is going to be 1/10 of people that started reading the opening. This is just pattern plays out every single time. I don't think there's any exception to the rule. It could be Peloton, it could be Nike, it could be Tesla, it doesn't matter. Same pattern plays out, which tells me that if I was trying to improve the copy of a page, I could say I'm going to improve the entire page, or I could say I'm going to focus on the part where I can have the biggest impact, which to me is the opening. And so the opening really, really, really matters. And so I would focus on just the opening part. And one of the things, in order to improve something, we have to first understand what the control is. The control is the version that we have right now. If you read the copy, it says your new partner in bed, ! And we're not going to cover deconstruction in this episode, but the basic idea is, and Lorenzo and I talk about this a lot, is that every word is a tax. Every element is communicating an emotion. When I see Lorenzo, when you see an exclamation mark, what emotion comes to your mind?
Anger.
No, exclamation mark. Like the,
yeah. Like I'm either like excited or angry or
some reaction. Yeah.
Like quite emotional, like strong, dramatic, emotional, kind of like a reaction.
Yeah. And that's really interesting that you see that way. Like, to me, my interpretation of exclamation mark is essentially like excitement. Like, when like someone is like super bubbly, like woohoo, like, and actually what's really interesting, and again, I don't want to, I'm just making this point to make a bigger point, which is that the mental model that I was using for a product like Hush blankets is kind of like going to a doctor analogy. And because it's kind of related, because it's related to sleep, which is actually in fact, there are some wonderful statistics around sleep, which I didn't look at, but I've seen in previous client projects where I think they say like 60-70% of people struggle with sleep. So it's a chronic issue for people. And it's something that is, it's very debilitating. I've myself had insomnia in the past, and it's really a helpless feeling. So I kind of like the analogy of going to a doctor, and I actually don't like the analogy of you being excited. Like, I don't want you to be excited. I want you to demonstrate expertise. And so if you go back to my document, Lorenzo, I can now talk about like how I so basically I'm saying the start of the sales pitch is the most important. If you don't nail the start, they won't even get to page 3. So it's meaningless to actually have really good content in page 3. So then we've included a screenshot of their opening. If you just go below the screenshot, I just want to talk about, okay, so to me, a weighted blanket is a highly technical product, at least as I was interpreting it. I'm not buying it to show it off to my friends. It's not like a car, a luxury car, right? Or I'm not buying it because they have a color gray or black. I don't give a crap, right? I'm buying it because I want to sleep better at night. And the copy on the page, if you scroll down, I've just included 2 snippets of the copy. So they say things like, it's your partner in bed, or drift into a cool sleep, or whatever. The first one, partner in bed, they're trying to be a little tongue-in-cheek, I think, and it's kind of fun and quirky. And that other one which says, drift into cool sleep, is kind of friendly, how marketers would talk. I would actually, and this is something that brands need to do more experimentations around. We focus a lot on copywriting. First of all, we don't focus on copywriting, but when we do focus on copywriting, we look at copywriting as being content and ideas. I think tone is just as important part of copywriting. So I would actually test a different voice. And I would like to do an experiment where we treat this like a conversation between a patient and a doctor. And some of you might be freaking out when I talk about this drastic change in tone and saying, like, oh my God, that's radically different. So the beauty of A/B testing, and this is why A/B testing is great, is that I can actually test a different tone. If people are coming to this page from my ad, then they are coming to this page and they are on the page deciding if they're going to buy or not. So it's essentially like a closed ecosystem, which allows me to kind of essentially test a different tone. And this is why I would A/B test it. But I wanted to give a specific example. Instead of just talking in theoretical terms, I want to talk about how I would actually write the opening. So Lorenzo, if you can just go back, can you just go back to the screenshot real quick? So let's just a little higher. Okay, so let's just read the copy. It says, your new partner in bed, drift into a cool, deep sleep with this sleep-inducing and cooling blanket. To me, this is just a marketer talking. This is just my interpretation. Then if you look at the features or the bullet points, it says relieves night sweats to help you sleep cool and dry all night long. Again, it's a repetition of the same point that was made in the opening. Then it says relaxes the body and mind to reduce bedtime anxiety and stress. Say goodnight to insomnia. Again, none of this is being substantiated. It's just a bullet point. And then they talk about the weight of the blanket feels like a gentle hug that calms your body and helps you sleep easy without tossing and turning throughout the night. Again, I think it's kind of making the same point in slightly different ways. So it's classic marketing speak. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. I want to now show you how I would have written the copy. So Lorenzo, if you scroll down a page, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So here's my copy. If you just highlight that opening sentence, it says there are 43. Yeah. So that is the opening of my sales pitch. So it's going to say, and I haven't thought about the spacing and how much we can fit, and that's not the point here. I just wanted to put some copy out. So we start off by saying there are 43 weighted blankets on the market. We've tested them all, right? And there's a lot to unpack over here, and I don't know how to, if we should discuss all of this, Lorenzo, or should I just continue?
No, I love it because I wonder if these guys have done it. I bet they've done it, that like they've tested a lot of different competitors. And actually they should show it that they've tested different competitors, right? Yeah. Because this goes back to like, okay, a claim is fantastic. A claim backed with a proof, an image, a video, number, statistics is 10x more powerful.
This is true. And there's even just this opening statement, there is a lot I've thought about. This is a statement template that I've come up with after years of experimentation. There's a lot here. The first thing that's powerful about it is that it instantly demonstrates expertise.
Yep.
The second thing about it is that one thing that's really interesting is that if you notice that second sentence, and I don't want to get too much into it, but it says we've tested them all. We could have also said we are the best, right? The reason why that would not have worked is that the moment the consumer smells that they are listening to a marketer, they start discounting what the marketer is saying. But when you say we've tested them all, our brains, you have to understand neuroscience. Our brains are machines that are designed to fill the gaps. So when you show an incomplete statement like we've tested them all, because it's an incomplete statement, because it doesn't tell you what the punchline is, the reader has to fill the punchline themselves. And the reader has no choice but to fill the punchline of they probably are better than those 43 competitors. Otherwise, why the hell do they have a website, right? Exactly. And what is also really interesting here is that I've talked about the fact that there are 43 different weighted blankets. So I'm already telling the buyer that, listen, there are lots of alternatives for you to consider. And remember, our brain is designed to conserve energy. So I'm telling the user that yes, you can walk into the wilderness and look at these alternatives, but that's a huge amount of. So anyway, that's the opening. Then it starts off with a headline of 3 years of experimentation. Again, doubling down on dramatization of our expertise, but doing it in a different way. And then it says we were wrong. Again, always I'm writing copy in a way where I want the reader to want to continue reading. We talked about the importance of the opening. So when you start off with we were wrong, you have no choice but to understand how you were wrong, right? Then it says Hush was started with a singular goal of making the world's best weighted blanket. Again, showing purpose. We're not just a company that is making a product, but we're making the world's best weighted blanket. We didn't realize this. We didn't realize how hard this journey would be, period. what you're seeing this morning. So here we are actually using a piece of JavaScript code, and I will tell my developer that if the person is seeing this page in the morning, it'll say what you're seeing this morning. If you're seeing it in the afternoon, it'll say what you're seeing this afternoon. It's a little bit of personalization,
Yeah.
just enough where it doesn't come across as a gimmick, but
Yeah.
enough where the person's like, oh yeah, that's funny, I'm actually in the afternoon. Is a success after 32 failed prototypes. Again, dramatizing how many times we failed. The consumer always wants to buy the best version of a product that exists. So by telling them that we failed 32 times, you're showing them, you're dramatizing the improvements you've made, and the user feels good about the fact that they didn't discover it 2 years ago when you had version 1.1, 1.0. Then we kind of, in the second paragraph, we talk about the hard signs. Now I want to like really kind of start dramatizing the fact that this is not just a blanket. So I say the weight of this blanket comes from 105 sewn squares. So on their product page, lower on the page, they talk about the fact that they have these individual squares, and each of them has this non-toxic glass sand that they fill in each of these squares. That's where the weight comes from. And it can also like move around a little bit, but within the square. So I'm saying the weight of this blanket comes from 105 sewn squares, each filled with just the right weight. Notice that word choice, just the right weight. Again, I'm dramatizing expertise, of non-toxic
You're
glass.
also, sorry, I'm interrupting you because you're also, what you're doing there, you're also lowering any objection that people might have around, oh, it's going to be too heavy for me, right?
That's exactly right.
The blanket is going to be too heavy, or I'm a tiny person, and I wonder if that's going to be too heavy for me, and I can barely breathe in the middle of the night.
That's exactly right. And one thing what we've done here is we've converted these keywords into links. There are two types of people. There are skimmers and diggers. The skimmer is going to read this and say, I'm sold. That's great. You've answered my question. The digger is going to read this and say, how the hell do you know it's just right? Right. And so if remember, one of the golden rules of conversion optimization is that if the buyer has unresolved questions in their mind, we know with statistical certainty that they will not buy. No one ever buys if they are unsure about something. So what you're doing here is you are giving them a path to actually scratch that itch and get the answer. And people scratch that itch by clicking on links, right? So you click on this link and then it'll show a light box. So that box that I have over here. And here is how we dramatize that statement. So we say getting the weight just right for each of the 105 squares isn't just a nice to have feature. It's what makes or breaks the blanket. So essentially, like basically saying it's you either get it right or you fail. If the weight is 10% more than needed, it adds too much restriction and negatively impacts the quality of sleep. Here again, what I've done is for diggers, I've made quality of sleep a hyperlink. And the idea is that when you click on it, instead of showing another pop-up, we will slide out content to give you, I haven't written that content, but it's just a placeholder. And then it says, if the weight is too low, then the blanket loses all effectiveness. So we're trying to say, basically, we have to get it perfectly right. And so that's the thing. But notice something else that I've done over here. If you look at the next sentence, it says, please let me know if this section is clear. If it isn't, I'd like to talk to you. So there are two things that have happened here. First of all, it's very clear that this was written by a person. Whenever you're writing copy, even if, of course, it's not an individual, but you want the reader to feel like it's a one-to-one conversation. So that's why I've added, if it isn't, I'd like to talk to you. I didn't say we'd like to talk to you. It's not a corporation to an individual. I wanted to be person to person. But what is happening here is something very profound. First of all, I've given a mechanism for the user to tell me if I've addressed their anxiety or not. So that's number one. But what's also interesting is if you really think about it from a motivation level, someone who is coming to this pop-up has read my description, clicked on the link, read this pop-up and come to the bottom. This is a highly motivated buyer. So my thought was this, right? So if you look at the second developer note, it says when clear is clicked right there, when clear is clicked, show a happy emoji or whatever. When unclear is clicked, ask for the person's email address with the promise that we'll respond in 24 hours. Couple of things here. Number one is that I want to capture the email address because they're highly motivated. No casual browser would have ever got to this stage. The second thing is that I've been very specific in saying that you will get a response in 24 hours, because nobody wants to give up their email address for an open-ended transaction. And my point is that now I want to talk about, very quickly, I want to talk about why would I prioritize this email? And my answer is what I just gave you, is that this is not just a customer request email. To me, Lorenzo, and I don't know if you see it differently, but this shows a highly motivated potential buyer who's very close to making a purchase. Do you agree or do you disagree?
So I have some thoughts around this, because when they say unclear, sure, I think step one could be to get an email address, but then step two, actually step one could be, what about it? What about what you just read is not clear? Yeah. So now all of a sudden you start actually capturing qualitative data around what they just read is not clear, right? And I wonder, after you got, let's say, 200 responses, I wonder if you find like common insights, common reason around what's unclear about that. So you keep on improving. It's kind of like a loop, right? You keep on improving based on the copy there, based on all the different insights that you gather. So it's kind of like a research tool, basically.
Oh yeah, right? No, that, I mean, it's absolutely a research tool, but it's also a way for me to, that's right. I mean, ultimately it's a research tool, but this person is there right now. And I would prioritize, like, in the internal ticketing system, I would actually prioritize this email, because I think that's different than just a regular email.
So here's another thought I had around this. I wonder, and this is like, actually, I would love to run this sort of like analysis. I wonder how many people actually say it's unclear. They leave the email address, then they scroll down in the page. They found, a lot of other, kind of like elements that help them in the decision-making process. They get convinced, because we all know that not everybody, like, they're always making a trade-off, right, between motivation and anxiety, right? Now, I wonder how many people that have submitted it's unclear then end up buying or end up not buying. Because to me, it's a sign of, okay, it's unclear, right? What is the weight of what I just put as a copy on the whole decision-making process? And, based on the feedback I'm getting, does it make sense to make changes to that part of the copy?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, and this is an important distinction I want to draw is or communicate in this show, is that we are only testing is an iterative process. We're not talking about the winning recipe. We're basically saying, here is something that I believe is different enough from the control, which is worth experimenting with. Is it going to win? I have zero idea. Yeah. But it's the starting point. So, okay, if you just come down to the bottom, So if you look at the structure of my sales pitch, again, this was not intentional, but I'm again trying to constantly dramatize the difficulty of getting it just right, because by doing that, I'm actually communicating my expertise. And one of the techniques that we know is that, again, when a doctor, if you think about the names of medical conditions and prescriptions, they are very complicated names. Now, I don't think this is intentional. I don't think the medical community were a group of marketers, but actually, I think it has a marketing implication. Something that sounds complicated, for me as a consumer, I feel like, okay, this is really effective. So what I've done here is I've now got a new headline called Dilemma. And it's, again, you'll notice very short sentences. It says, Stephanie isn't James. Again, this is one of the questions that the person has, is that, I'm not the same as other people. So how do they get this right? And I want to address this question. So I said, so how can we design the perfect weighted blanket? Again, showing questions allows me to connect with the questions that are floating in my mind. By sleep, and so the answer is by sleep testing hundreds of people to identify the perfect, and by the way, I've just made this up. I don't have any idea about if they've actually done this, but this is my template. By sleep testing hundreds of people to identify the perfect weight that works for most people, we use a principle of statistics called normal distribution to find the sweet spot, and I've included a graph over here. What this does is it actually, again, it's a little bit for optics for the person to look at this and say, oh my God, this company is a bunch of like statisticians, or they really understand this. So it's a little bit of it's a little sneaky in a way, but I'm not misleading the buyer. I would go to the client and I would say, we need to actually do this kind of a study, but I'm just showing the client how we can actually demonstrate expertise. And then again, below that, I'm saying, please let me know if the section is clear. If it isn't clear, I'll rewrite it, clear, unclear. I constantly am adding these feedback beacons. So this is, I think this is the opening that I have, Lorenzo.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to say is that, you know, when you're talking about, here, where is it? Oh, yeah. After 32 failed prototypes, I think you and I spoke before in private conversations around the power of showing past prototypes, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, a few months ago, I actually posted on LinkedIn about this. Imagine if, you know, you've been in the business for 50 years, right? And all of a sudden, you show every single prototype that you've gone through in the past 50 years to find the, you know, finally the last, you know, most compelling product for people. At the end of the day, if you think about in general, like the business of an e-commerce, you know, selling physical products, you know, you compare it with like the SaaS business, right? The SaaS, at the end of the day, it's continue improvement of a product, right? And obviously, as a user, you just see the end conclusion of the product, right? So what I was thinking here is, imagine if you even like have a video of how you've gone through like each step, each prototype, and even like a story around, okay, prototype 1, here's why we made changes, and then how you became prototype 2. Then prototype, it kind of like you know, some websites have like a story like, oh, we got started in 1980, and my father started a company in 1980, and then you know, in 1981, we had the first client. So it's kind of like a timeline of all the different prototypes, and even the decisions that have been made along each prototype.
And the great thing, and you're absolutely right, and I think sometimes, you know, some people listening to this would be saying, well, this is too much content on the product page. Yeah. We're not talking about embedding this on the page. We're talking about, we could just simply make 32 failed prototypes into a hyperlink, and then that could reveal a light box. So you're letting the user decide. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. And also, let's not forget that we're also tracking the way people are interacting with all these elements, right? So when people are clicking here, we'll be tracking that behavior. And we want to track not just if people are clicking on it, but what happens after they click on it, and how clicking on that is impacting their behavior of buying, not buying, right? So it's also like a data point for whoever is running the test.